Welcome to the Human History Channel. Today we will immerse ourselves in one of the most tragic and little-known family dramas of the 20th century, the story of Yakov Dzhugashvili, the eldest son of Joseph Stalin. This is not just the story of a captured Red Army officer. This is a tale about a man crushed between the cruel ideology of his father and the ruthless machine of war, between honor and disgrace, between hope for rescue and absolute solitude. Yakov Dzhugashvili, the eldest son of Joseph Stalin, was born on the 18th of March in the year 1907 in the small Georgian village of Badji, from the leader's first marriage to Ekaterina Kato, Svanidze. Ekaterina, a simple seamstress from a poor family, married the young revolutionary Joseph Dzhugashvili in 1906, when he was 28 years old and she was only 21. Their marriage was brief and tragic. She died of typhus on the 22nd of November in 1907, when Yakov was only 8 months old. Stalin, then not yet the all-powerful leader but an underground revolutionary pursued by the tsarist secret police, could not take on the care of the child. He left his son in the care of his mother's relatives in Georgia, where Yakov grew up in the atmosphere of a traditional Caucasian family, far from his father. Only in 1921, when Stalin already held key positions in the Bolshevik Party and the Soviet government, did Yakov move to Moscow. By that time, Joseph Stalin, born on the 18th of December in 1878 in Gori as Joseph Vissarionovich Dzhugashvili, had come a long way from a seminarian at the Tiflis Theological Seminary to one of the leaders of the October Revolution. His own childhood was marked by cruelty. His father, the shoemaker Vissarion Dzhugashvili, an alcoholic and tyrant, often beat his son, and his mother, Ekaterina Geladze, a deeply religious woman, tried to protect him but herself suffered from poverty and violence. These early traumas, according to historians, shaped in Stalin a suspicion, cruelty, and emotional detachment that later manifested in his relationships with his children. Stalin, who became the general secretary of the Central Committee of the Russian Communist Party, Bolsheviks, in 1922 and gradually concentrated absolute power in his hands, was a complex figure both in politics and in personal life. He rarely showed warmth, preferring to see those around him as tools for achieving goals. His relationship with Yakov was particularly tense. The teenager, arriving from provincial Georgia into the Kremlin elite, it felt like an outsider. Stalin, occupied with party intrigues and the struggle against the opposition, including Trotsky, Zinoviev, and Kamenev, devoted little time to his son. He criticized Yakov for his softness, indecisiveness, and failures in studies. In 1928, after a quarrel with his father over an unsuccessful romance, Yakov attempted suicide by shooting himself but missed. Stalin reacted cynically. "Ha, he couldn't even hit that," a phrase that emphasized his contempt for weakness. Despite this, Yakov strove to prove his worth. He graduated from the Moscow Institute of Transport Engineers and later from the Artillery Academy. However, his father continued to see him as a failure, especially disapproving of his personal life. After the death of his first wife, Stalin married for the second time in 1919 to Nadezhda Alilayeva, a young stenographer from the party environment, who was 23 years younger than him. This marriage produced 2 children, son Vasily in 1921 and daughter Svetlana in 1926. Nadezhda, suffering from depression and jealousy toward her husband, there were rumors of his affairs, committed suicide on the 9th of November in 1932 after a quarrel at a banquet, shooting herself in the heart. This tragedy deeply wounded Stalin, but also intensified his paranoia. He suspected conspiracies even in his family. Nadezhda raised not only her own children, but also Yakov, as well as the adopted son Artyom Sergeyev, the son of the deceased revolutionary Fyodor Sergeyev, whom Stalin adopted in 1921. Artyom became a close friend of Vasily and Svetlana, and Stalin treated him almost like his own, encouraging his military career. Artyom rose to the rank of Major General of Artillery and died in 1942 on the front. Stalin's relationship with Vasily was ambivalent. He spoiled his younger son, allowing him much, but at the same time kept him in fear. Vasily, born on the 24th of March in 1921, grew up in Kremlin luxury, but without maternal care after 1932. Stalin sent him to a special school where Vasily displayed a rebellious character. He fought, skipped classes, smoked. In 1938, Stalin wrote a letter to his son's teacher, in which he called Vasily a spoiled youth of average abilities, a little savage, not always honest, fond of blackmailing weak teachers, often impudent. Despite this, his father advanced his career. Vasily became a pilot, during the war commanded a fighter regiment, shot down several German planes, and rose to the rank of Lieutenant General of Aviation. However, alcoholism and impulsiveness let him down. In 1942, he caused a drunken brawl in which people died, for which he was removed from command. After the war, in 1952, after an aviation disaster at the airfield entrusted to him, Stalin sent his son to prison for a year. After his father's death in 1953, Vasily was arrested on charges of anti-Soviet propaganda and spent 8 years in prison. Released in 1961, he quickly returned to alcohol and died in a car accident on the 19th of March in 1962 in Kazan, leaving 3 children from different marriages. A small digression. If you like the Human History channel, subscribe and give it a like. We appreciate every viewer, and by receiving this feedback, we will make our videos even better and more interesting. You can also write in the comments where you are watching this video from. So, let's continue. Svetlana, Stalin's only daughter, born on the 28th of February in 1926, was his favorite in childhood. He called her Sparrow or Hostess, wrote her tender letters. "I kiss my Svetlanka, Papa." She grew up in the Kremlin, surrounded by privileges but also by fear, a witness to arrests and disappearances of family friends during the Great Terror of 1937 to 1938. After her mother's death, Svetlana took on the role of house mistress, but her relationship with her father became tense in adolescence. Stalin controlled her personal life. He forbade her first romance with the Jewish film director Alexei Kapler in 1942. Kapler was arrested and exiled, disapproved of her marriages. Svetlana married 3 times in the Soviet Union, to Grigory Morozov, 1944 to 1947, son Iosif, Yuri Zhyachdanov, 1949 to 1952, daughter Ekaterina, and Ivan Svanidze, 1957 to 1959, no children. After Stalin's death, she changed her surname to Alilayeva, her mother's maiden name, and in 1967, during a trip to India, defected to the United States through the American Embassy. There she married architect William Peters, 1970 to 1973. Daughter Olga wrote memoirs 20 Letters to a Friend, 1967, where she described her father as a tyrant, but also as a person with human weaknesses. Svetlana lived in the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, returned briefly in 1984, died on the 22nd of November in 2011 in Wisconsin, remaining a symbol of rebellion against her father's legacy. Let us return to Yakov. Already an adult, he had several relationships and marriages. From 1930, he cohabited with Olga Petrovna Golisheva, from whom in 1936 was born son Yevgeny Yakovlevich Dzhugashvili. Yevgeny became a military engineer, rose to the rank of lieutenant general in retirement, participated in the Afghan War, and still, as of 2025, lives in Russia, defending the memory of his grandfather. In 1935, Yakov married Zoya Ivanovna Gunina, but the marriage fell apart quickly. From her in 1938 was born daughter Galina, who became a philologist and died in 2007. Stalin did not approve of these connections, considering them unworthy. Only in 1938 did Yakov marry Yulia Isakovna Meltzer, a ballerina of Jewish origin, whom he met through mutual friends. They had no children together, but Yulia adopted a daughter from a previous marriage, and this union seemed to give Yakov stability. However, family ties only added complexity to his fate, exacerbated by tense relations with his father and personal experiences. Stalin, seeing in his son a reflection of his own weakness, possibly projecting traumas from his own father, often humiliated him, calling him a failure. This contrasted with his relationships with Vasily and Svetlana, whom he, despite his strictness, considered his own, raised under his direct influence. In July 1941, in the first weeks of the Great Patriotic War, Yakov, serving as a senior lieutenant in the 14th Howitzer Artillery Regiment of the 14th Tank Division, found himself in the area of battles near Vitebsk, in the vicinity of Lyazno, during the Smolensk battle. The Red Army suffered the heaviest losses. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers died or were captured in the chaos of retreat and encirclement. It was there, on the 16th of July in 1941, that Yakov was captured by German troops from the 20th Tank Division of the Wehrmacht. From the very beginning, the circumstances of his capture were shrouded in contradictions. Soviet propaganda, relying on the testimonies of survivors, claimed that he died heroically, refusing to retreat and allegedly exclaiming, "I am Stalin's son," preferring death to capture. This version perfectly fit into the state ideology. Just a few days after his disappearance, on the 28th of August in 1941, Order number 270 was issued, in which Stalin declared all those captured as traitors to the motherland, and ordered them to be shot on the spot or destroyed from the air if that was impossible. In this logic, capture equaled treason, and no son of the leader could allow such a disgrace. However, the reality, emerging from German archives, captured by the Allies after the war and interrogation protocols, was different. Just 2 days after capture, on the 18th of July, the Germans conducted the first interrogation of Yakov at the headquarters of Army Group Center. He was identified as Stalin's son thanks to documents and testimonies of other captured Red Army soldiers who recognized him. In the first interviews, Yakov indeed made statements that sounded anti-Soviet. He criticized his father's policy, complained about the chaos in the Red Army, and allegedly urged soldiers to stop resisting. However, upon deeper analysis of his words, a different portrait emerged of a man torn by internal conflicts. During the interrogations, he displayed anti-Semitic sentiments, complaining about Jews who rush to where conditions are good. At the same time, he categorically denied rumors about the Jewish origin of Stalin's wives, insisting that the first was Georgian and the second Russian. Although Nadezhda Alilayeva had partial Jewish roots through her father, these statements spoke not of a willingness to collaborate with the Nazis, but of personal discord. Yakov was a patriot but disillusioned with his father and the system. In one of the interrogations, he even defended the Soviet political system, although he expressed dissatisfaction with the state of the army, whose supreme commander was Stalin. German propaganda immediately used his capture for psychological warfare. He was photographed surrounded by Wehrmacht officers, and these pictures formed the basis of millions of leaflets scattered over Soviet positions, with the inscription, "Stalin's eldest son calls on you to surrender. Why are you fighting for the Bolsheviks?" A propaganda film was even made, where Yakov's words were edited to make it seem as if he was agitating to lay down arms. But despite the efforts, Yakov never became a reliable agent of influence. He did not give open, clear statements against the Soviet Union, did not record radio broadcasts, did not participate in recruiting Soviet prisoners. His anti-Soviet statements remained scattered, emotional, unsystematic, not what was needed for a serious campaign. The Germans, disappointed in his potential as an orator, transferred him to a Gestapo prison in Berlin. There he was subjected to torture, beatings, starvation, psychological pressure, and twice attempted suicide by cutting his veins with a shard of glass. This was a period when he ceased to be a propaganda tool and became a victim of cruel, inhuman pressure, typical of the Nazi camp system. Later, in late 1941 to early 1942, he was transferred to a camp for prisoner-of-war officers in Hammelburg, Auflag Roman 13b in Bavaria. The conditions there were relatively mild by the standards of the Nazi system. Prisoners received rations according to the Geneva Convention, could engage in crafts. In one of the barracks, a small workshop operated where inmates carved chess pieces from bone or wood, receiving additional rations for it, bread or potatoes. It is known that one such set, made by Yakov or his cellmates, was exchanged by a German junior officer for several potatoes and later sold on the black market for 800 Reichsmarks. But even here, Yakov looked terrible. A Soviet counterintelligence officer who inspected the camp after the war later described him as a living corpse, with sunken cheeks, a pale face, in baggy, worn-out uniform. He was physically exhausted, but not yet broken in spirit, maintaining contacts with other prisoners, including Poles and French. The turning point came in February 1943, after the capitulation of Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus's 6th Army at Stalingrad, a pivotal moment in the war. The Nazis decided to use Yakov as a high-value hostage for exchange. By personal order of Reichsfuhrer-SS Heinrich Himmler, he was transferred to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp near Berlin and placed in a special, top-secret section, Sonderlager A. This sector was separated from the rest of the camp by double electrified fences, barbed wire, and guarded by elite SS units. Other valuable prisoners were held there. Vyacheslav Molotov's nephew Vasily Kokorin, actually fictitious to confuse, Irish serviceman Thomas Cushing, erroneously called in some sources Churchill's nephew, and British officers, including Captain William Padbury, nephew of British Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden. Here Yakov was not just a prisoner of war. He was currency, that Germany was ready to offer in exchange for Paulus or other high-ranking Nazis captured by the Soviets. However, Stalin rejected all exchange proposals, transmitted through Swedish diplomat Count Folke Bernadotte and the International Red Cross. When in February 1943, the Germans officially offered to exchange Yakov for Paulus, the leader replied shortly and harshly, "I do not exchange a soldier for a field marshal." This phrase carried a double meaning. On one hand, it emphasized the inflexibility of the Soviet position and the equality of all before the homeland. On the other, it excommunicated Yakov from the family, turning him into one of many, and thus into nothing. For Yakov, this became the final blow. He understood that his father not only had no intention of saving him, but also publicly deprived him of the right to a special position, even to being recognized as a son. This renunciation echoed early conflicts. Stalin, who himself experienced paternal violence, reproduced it in his relationships with his children, but on the scale of state policy. But the real end came on the 13th of April in 1943. In the evening, on Berlin radio, a statement allegedly sounded from Stalin in which he declared, "I have no son named Yakov. Yakov is a working name, and the name Dzhugashvili is unknown to me. I do not know where he is now, whether he is alive or dead, but I repeat, I have no son named Yakov." Although this phrase, according to available historical data, is more of a legend or distortion, there are no reliable confirmations of a public radio speech by Stalin on this topic, and real refusals were transmitted through diplomatic channels, including the Red Cross. It symbolized a complete break. This phrase was not a simple denial, it was erasure. Stalin was not just renouncing his son, he was erasing him from reality, as if he had never existed. For Yakov, this was worse than death. It was a denial not only of kinship, but also of the very right to existence in a world where personality was subordinated to ideology. The next day, on the 14th of April in 1943, in the evening, a quarrel occurred. Yakov quarreled with several English officers, Thomas Cushing, William Padbury, and others, at the toilet in the barracks. The reasons were petty, everyday. Disagreement over the queue, mutual reproaches about hygiene, accumulated irritation from joint confinement. But in his state, after almost 2 years of captivity, after torture, hunger, humiliations, and finally after the alleged renunciation by his father, even such a trifle could become the last straw. Suddenly he left the barracks, violating curfew, and ran to the camp perimeter. The German sentries shouted for him to stop, but he did not obey. Climbing onto the barracks wall, he jumped outside and rushed straight to the high-voltage fence. Running up to it, he turned to SS Sergeant Conrad Harfish, standing at the machine gun tower, and shouted, "Guard, do not be a coward, shoot me." The sergeant fired 4 times. But according to eyewitness testimonies, including Caucasian and Cushing, interrogated after the war, and the official medical conclusion found in 1945 in the SS archives, Yakov did not die from the bullets. He was instantly killed by a high-voltage electric shock, about 5,000 volts, which struck him before the shots. His body fell right at the fence, charred and motionless. He was not trying to escape, he was asking for death. And not just death, but a worthy, meaningful demise. For him, this was not an end but a last, free decision. Instead of slow fading in captivity, instead of awaiting execution upon possible return to the Soviet Union, where prisoners faced filtration camps and repressions, instead of eternal humiliation, he chose a moment in which he remained the master of his fate. After his death, the Soviet state maintained silence. Not a single official publication mentioned his name. Red Star, in August 1941, a week after his capture, wrote about victories on the front, the liquidation of German divisions, the heroism of soldiers, but not a word about Stalin's son. This was not an oversight, but a deliberate policy. In the ideological system, where a prisoner equaled a traitor, even the name of the leader's son could not violate this canon. Yakov's family, wife Yulia and children, suffered. Yulia was arrested in 1941 as the wife of a traitor. She spent 18 months in prison, and the children were sent to an orphanage only after the war. In 1945 to 1946, Western diplomats and Soviet intelligence discovered in Berlin the German dossier on Yakov, with photocopies of Himmler's letters, pictures of his body, the autopsy protocol, and even teeth extracted for identification. Stalin was informed only of fragmentary information, that his son was killed by guards during an escape attempt. The full story of suicide caused by despair and public renunciation by his father, he apparently never learned in detail. According to some testimonies from Svetlana and close associates, upon learning of the death, Stalin stared silently at his son's photograph for a long time, and later, in a narrow circle, called him a real man whom failure bypassed unfairly. These words contrasted with his public rigidity. They showed that behind the mask of a ruthless leader hid a person capable of pain, of regret, but he was unable to express it openly, for power demanded otherwise. That personal suffering be sacrificed to public duty. After Stalin's death on the 5th of March in 1953, his family fell apart. Vasily in prison, Svetlana in emigration, Yakov's descendants in the shadows. Stalin's legacy, millions of victims of repressions, industrialization, victory in the war, but also destroyed lives of loved ones. Thus ended the life of Yakov Dzhugashvili, not as the son of the leader, not as a hero or traitor, but as a man caught between two worlds, both of which rejected him. He did not seek glory and did not strive for power. He simply lived in an era where personality had no meaning if it did not serve ideology. His tragedy is not a private case, but a symbol. It is a symbol of how totalitarian systems destroy not only enemies, but also their own, especially those who dared to remain human in a world demanding unconditional submission. His death in Sachsenhausen is not just an episode of the war. It is a quiet, desperate cry for freedom in a world where freedom was a crime. The fates of Stalin's other children, Vasily, drowned in alcohol, and Svetlana, fleeing from her father's shadow, emphasize this theme. Even in the tyrant's family, personal happiness was an illusion. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Good luck and see you in the next episode.